The fog rolled in thick over San Francisco, cloaking the Golden Gate Bridge in a gray shroud. As James Harper stood at the edge of his Pacific Heights mansion's rooftop terrace, staring out at a city that no longer felt like home. At 46, James was the picture of success. A tech entrepreneur whose green energy startup SolarWave had revolutionized battery storage and landed him on Forbes's 30 Under 40 list a decade ago. His 12,000-square-foot mansion, perched on a hill with sweeping views of the bay, was a testament to his achievements. Floor-to-ceiling windows, an infinity pool that seemed to spill into the horizon, a smart home system that controlled everything from lights to the espresso machine, and a garage housing a Tesla and a vintage Porsche. Inside the walls were adorned with abstract art, the kitchen gleamed with marble and stainless steel, and a home theater rivaled any cinema in the Mission District. To the outside world, James had it all: wealth status, a legacy carved in silicon and steel. But as he stood on that terrace, the cold September wind biting through his tailored blazer, he felt nothing but an ache that no amount of money could soothe. His wife Abigail was gone, taken by a sailing accident off the Marin Headlands 6 months ago, and with her, the warmth that once filled this house had vanished. Their 2 children, Ethan 12 and Lily 7, were shadows of themselves, and James, for all his brilliance, couldn't fix the one thing that mattered most: their broken hearts. Abigail had been the soul of their family. A marine biologist with a laugh that could light up a room. She'd met James at Stanford during a sustainability conference. She was presenting on ocean conservation, her blonde hair catching the sunlight as she spoke passionately about saving coral reefs. James, already a rising star in tech, was captivated not by her beauty, though she was striking, but by her ability to make the world feel softer, kinder. They married at 25, built a life together, and welcomed Ethan, and then Lily. Abigail was the one who taught Ethan to sketch the waves she studied, who sang folk tunes to Lily on a ukulele under the backyard's eucalyptus tree. She was the one who reminded James to close his laptop and watch the sunset with her, their feet dangling in the pool as they talked about dreams bigger than profits. Their life wasn't perfect. James's long hours at SolarWave often left Abigail alone with the kids, but it was full, vibrant, alive. Until that July afternoon. Abigail had taken their sailboat Starfish out with a research team to study kelp forests. A sudden squall hit the boat, capsized, and while the crew survived, Abigail didn't. The Coast Guard said she'd stayed behind to free a tangled line, saving a colleague, but losing her own life. Ethan and Lily weren't on the boat, thank God, but the news shattered them. James could still hear Ethan scream when he told them, see Lily's tiny hands clutch her stuffed octopus, the last gift Abigail gave her. The months since were a haze of grief. The mansion, once filled with Abigail's laughter and the kids' chatter, was now a mausoleum of silence. Ethan, once a talkative boy who'd sketch superheroes and beg to visit the exploratorium, had retreated into his room, his face lit only by the glow of a gaming console. He barely spoke his sketchbooks, untouched his grades, slipping at his private school in Presidio Heights. Lily, who used to twirl through the house singing Abigail's songs, had stopped singing entirely. She'd sit for hours in the music room staring at her mother's ukulele, her small fingers tracing its strings, but never playing. At night, she'd crawl into James's bed, clutching her octopus, whispering, "Why didn't Mommy come home?" James had no answers. He'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, the king-sized bed feeling like an ocean without Abigail beside him. His chest would tighten, a collapse of something he couldn't name, and he'd hold Lily until she fell asleep, her tears soaking his shirt. He was drowning too, but he was the father he was supposed to be, the strong one. So he did what he knew best. He threw money at the problem. James hired the best child therapists in the Bay Area, paying $400 an hour for sessions at a sleek office in Nob Hill. He brought in a nutritionist to coax Lily to eat, a tutor to help Ethan with school, and a nanny Claire with a master's in child psychology from Berkeley. He filled the house with distractions, a high-tech drone for Ethan programmed to follow voice commands, a custom dollhouse for Lily complete with tiny furniture, even a Shetland pony stabled at a nearby ranch for weekend visits. He booked a trip to Disneyland, thinking a change of scenery might help, but Ethan sulked through the rides, and Lily cried at the sight of families laughing together. Nothing worked. At dinner, James would sit at the long walnut table, watching Ethan push quinoa around his plate, and Lily stare blankly at her juice glass. The gourmet kitchen, where Abigail used to make seaweed salads and hum while chopping vegetables, was now a place of sterile silence, the meals prepared by a chef who left before they ate. James felt helpless. He could negotiate billion-dollar deals, pitch to venture capitalists without breaking a sweat. But he couldn't make his children smile. Worse, he was disconnecting. Work became his refuge, late nights at SolarWave's downtown office, weekends buried in spreadsheets. He'd leave the house at 5:30 a.m., return past 10 p.m., the kids already asleep. The mansion's smart lights would dim as he walked through, a cold reminder of how empty it had become. The house itself was falling apart, not structurally but in spirit. Abigail's touches, her potted succulents, her framed photos of tide pools, her ukulele on its stand, were gathering dust. The kids' playroom, once a riot of color with finger-painted murals, was untouched toys scattered like relics. The backyard, where Abigail used to host science picnics with microscopes and star charts, was overgrown, the eucalyptus tree drooping under neglect. James couldn't keep up. His office, always pristine, thanks to a cleaning service, had prompted him to hire the same agency for the house. He didn't care who they sent. He just wanted the mess gone, a small illusion of control, in a life that felt like it was unraveling. That's how Maria Gonzalez arrived, stepping quietly into the Harper mansion one foggy Monday morning in September 2025. She was 42, petite, with dark hair pulled into a neat bun, dressed in a simple gray uniform and worn sneakers. Her hands, calloused from years of work, carried a canvas bag of cleaning supplies. James barely looked at her when she arrived, his mind on a board meeting. "Start with the kitchen," he said, handing her a key fob for the smart locks. "The kids' rooms are upstairs, but don't disturb them." He didn't ask her name, didn't notice the way her brown eyes scanned the house, not just for dust, but for the weight of its silence. Maria nodded her smile, polite but guarded, and got to work. Maria was an immigrant from Peru, living in a modest apartment in Oakland with her 2 teenage children, Sophia and Diego. She'd wake at 4:30 a.m., cook breakfast for her kids, and take the BART across the bay to clean houses in San Francisco's wealthiest neighborhoods. What James didn't know, what no one at the agency bothered to mention, was that Maria had once been a youth worker in Lima, organizing art programs for children in underserved communities. She'd studied child development, painted murals with kids, taught them to find joy in colors and stories. But political unrest in Peru had forced her to flee with her children after her husband, a journalist, vanished under mysterious circumstances. In the U.S., her credentials weren't recognized, so she took jobs cleaning homes, washing dishes, anything to pay the rent and keep Sophia and Diego in school. Yet Maria never lost the part of herself that understood children, that saw their hearts before their tantrums. As she moved through the Harper mansion, wiping down counters and vacuuming rugs, she noticed more than dirt. She saw Ethan's sketchbooks unopened on his desk, their pages blank. She saw Lily's stuffed octopus clutched tightly, even in sleep. She saw the family photos on the mantel, Abigail laughing on a beach, James with his arm around her, the kids building a sand castle. The warmth in those images was gone from this house, replaced by a stillness that felt like a held breath. Maria worked quietly, her presence barely a ripple. She cleaned the kitchen, scrubbing the marble until it gleamed, but her eyes kept drifting to the music room where Lily sat one morning staring at the ukulele. Maria didn't speak, just dusted around her, but she heard it, a faint hum, a melody Lily was trying to remember. It was one of Abigail's favorites, a folk tune about the sea. Maria paused, her rag still in hand, and something stirred in her. She didn't know the full story of the Harpers' loss, but she knew grief. She'd felt it when her husband disappeared, when she left her home, when she traded her paintbrushes for a mop. She saw it in Lily's small shoulders, in Ethan's closed door, in James's hurried footsteps as he left each morning. This house wasn't just messy. It was starving for something no therapist or toy could provide. Maria didn't say anything. That day didn't push or pry. She just cleaned, observed, and waited. But in her heart, she made a quiet promise she wouldn't let this family's light go out, not if she could help it. As she left the mansion that evening, the fog lifting over the bay, she glanced back at the glowing windows and thought of her own children, of the murals they used to paint together. Maybe, just maybe, she could bring a little of that color here. James, meanwhile, was sinking deeper into his own isolation. That night he came home late, the house dark except for a single light in Ethan's room. He knocked, but Ethan didn't answer, the hum of his gaming console the only sound. James stood there, hand on the door, wondering when he'd lost the ability to talk to his son. Downstairs he passed the kitchen, noticing it was spotless for the first time in weeks. He didn't think about the woman who'd cleaned it, didn't wonder about her story. He just poured a glass of bourbon and sat in the home theater. The screen blank his mind, replaying the moment he got the call about Abigail. He'd been in a meeting pitching to investors when his phone buzzed. By the time he reached the marina, it was too late. He hadn't cried since the funeral, hadn't let himself feel the full weight of it. He was James Harper, the man who solved problems, who built empires. But now, staring into the dark, he wondered if he was failing at the only job that mattered: being a father. The mansion with all its luxury felt like a cage, and he didn't know how to escape. The San Francisco fog had settled into a fine mist by mid-October, softening the edges of the Pacific Heights mansion as Maria Gonzalez arrived at 7:30 a.m., her canvas bag slung over her shoulder. The Harper household was still asleep, or so it seemed, but Maria knew better. She'd been coming for weeks now, and the silence of the house wasn't restful. It was heavy, like a held breath that never released. She slipped off her sneakers at the door, trading them for soft slippers to avoid waking anyone, and began her routine, wiping down the kitchen counters, sweeping the hardwood floors, polishing the glass walls that framed the view of the Golden Gate Bridge. But her eyes, sharp and observant, caught more than smudges. In Ethan's room, she noticed his sketchbook, still untouched, their covers collecting dust. In the music room, Lily's stuffed octopus lay abandoned beside the ukulele, its strings silent. The mansion, with its smart lights and heated floors, felt like a museum of a life that no longer existed. Maria, at 42, had seen enough pain in her own life to recognize it here. Back in Lima, she'd been a youth worker, painting murals with children in dusty courtyards, teaching them to find joy in colors and stories despite their hardships. That life was gone, stolen by political unrest and a husband who vanished without a trace, but Maria carried its lessons in her heart. As she dusted the mantel, pausing at a photo of Abigail laughing with Ethan and Lily on a Sausalito beach, She felt a quiet resolve. She couldn't replace their mother, but she could offer something, maybe not a cure, but a spark. That morning, as Maria scrubbed the kitchen's marble island, she heard a faint hum from the music room. It was Lily, curled up on the velvet chaise, her small fingers tracing the ukulele's strings without playing. The tune was hesitant, a fragment of the folk song Abigail used to sing about the sea. Maria set down her rag and walked to the doorway, her movements soft, like she was approaching a frightened bird. "Lily," she said gently, "that's a pretty song. Did your mom teach it to you?" Lily froze, her hazel eyes wide, clutching her octopus. For a moment, Maria thought she'd scared her off, but then Lily nodded, her voice barely a whisper. She sang it, "When we watched the waves." Maria knelt beside her, keeping her distance. "My mom used to sing to me too, back in Peru. Not about the sea, but about the mountains. Want to tell me about your mom's song?" Lily hesitated, then spoke, her words tumbling out like pebbles. It was about a sailor who loved a mermaid. Mommy said it was silly, but she sang it anyway. Maria smiled, her eyes crinkling. "Silly songs are the best kind. They stick in your heart." Lily's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Maria stood brushing her hands on her apron. "You know, I brought something today." Want to see Lily's curiosity won out, and she followed Maria to the kitchen. From her canvas bag, Maria pulled a small, battered paint set, her own from years ago, when she'd taught kids in Lima to paint their dreams. The colors were faded, the brushes worn, but they were hers, a piece of who she'd been. "I thought we could paint something," Maria said, spreading newspaper on the kitchen table. "Maybe a mermaid like in your mom's song." Lily's eyes lit up just for a second, and she nodded. Maria set out paper, poured water into a cup, and handed Lily a brush. The little girl dipped it in blue, her strokes shaky but deliberate, painting a mermaid with a lopsided tail. "She's swimming to find her sailor," Lily said, her voice stronger now. Maria painted beside her, a simple wave, not correcting Lily's messy lines, but adding her own to make the scene feel alive. For the first time in months, Lily's face softened, her small hands moving with purpose. The kitchen, usually sterile, was a mess of paint and water, but it felt warmer, like it was waking up. Ethan came downstairs an hour later, his hoodie pulled up, earbuds dangling. He stopped at the kitchen doorway, eyeing the scene Lily painting, Maria laughing as a drop of green splattered her cheek. "What's this?" he asked, his tone guarded but curious. Maria looked up, unfazed. "We're making mermaids. Want to join?" Ethan shrugged, but he didn't leave. He sat at the table, picking up a pencil and sketching a wave with sharp comic book lines. "Mom liked waves," he muttered, almost to himself. Maria nodded, not pushing. She had good taste. Waves are strong like stories. Ethan's pencil paused, then moved again, adding a figure, a woman with long hair sailing on the wave. Maria didn't comment, but she saw it, the first spark of Ethan connecting to his mother's memory, not hiding from it. The three of them worked in quiet rhythm, the only sounds the rustle of paper and Lily's occasional giggle when paint smudged her fingers. By the time the paintings were done, the table was a riot of color: mermaids, waves, a clumsy sun. Maria hung them on the patio to dry the misty air, curling their edges. Lily looked at her mermaid and said, "It's not perfect, but I like it." Maria knelt beside her. "Perfect's boring. This is yours, and that's what matters." James came home early that evening, a rare occurrence, his briefcase heavy with contracts. He paused at the patio, noticing the paintings fluttering in the breeze. Ethan's wave sketch caught his eye, the figure unmistakably Abigail. His throat tightened. He found Maria cleaning the kitchen, Lily napping on the couch, with her octopus Ethan back in his room. "Did you do this?" he asked, pointing to the patio. Maria nodded, wiping her hands. The kids did most of it. They just needed a little push. James looked at her, really looked for the first time. Her uniform was stained with paint, her hair escaping its bun, but her eyes held a quiet strength. "Thank you," he said, his voice low. Maria just smiled and returned to her work. James stood there feeling something stir, a flicker of hope, but also guilt. He'd been absent, letting therapists and nannies handle his kids while he hid in his office. He didn't know how to bridge the gap, but those paintings were proof someone was trying. The next day, Maria brought a small glass jar to the house decorated with faded stickers from her own children's crafts. She set it on the kitchen counter and called Lily and Ethan over. "This is a memory jar," she said. "Write down something happy about your mom, something you want to keep close. It doesn't have to be big." Lily scribbled immediately her note, simple. "Mommy sang to me at bedtime." Ethan hesitated, then wrote, "She taught me to draw waves." They folded their notes and dropped them into the jar, the glass clinking softly. Maria added her own, though she didn't share it. "My kids laughed today because of you." The jar became a ritual, a way for the kids to hold on to Abigail without drowning in sadness. Each day they added a note. Mom loved starfish. She made funny pancakes, and the jar grew heavier. A quiet anchor in the kitchen. Maria didn't push them to talk, didn't analyze their grief like the therapists did. She just listened, her presence steady, like the mountains she'd once painted in Peru. But not everyone welcomed Maria's presence. Claire, the nanny, noticed the shift in the kids. Lily followed Maria around, asking to paint or help dust. Ethan, usually glued to his console, started lingering in the kitchen sketching while Maria cleaned. Claire, with her crisp blouses and structured schedules, felt her authority slipping. One afternoon, as Maria and Lily painted in the garden, Claire marched in, her voice sharp. "Maria, you're here to clean, not play art teacher. Lily, you have music lessons now." Lily clung to Maria's arm, her eyes defiant. "I want to stay with Maria." Ethan, passing by, added, "She's more fun than your boring lessons." Claire's face reddened, but she said nothing, retreating to call the agency. Later, she confronted James in his study. "Maria's overstepping," she said. "She's not trained for this. I'm the professional." James listened, his mind on Ethan's sketch from the patio. "The kids seem happier," he said simply. Claire's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. James didn't say it aloud, but he was starting to see Maria differently, not just as the housekeeper, but as someone who was reaching his children in a way he couldn't. Maria, for her part, stayed quiet about her past. She didn't mention her years as a youth worker, the murals she'd painted with kids in Lima, the way she'd helped children process loss through art. She didn't need to prove herself. She just showed up day after day with her paint set and her stories. One evening, as she and the kids sat at the kitchen table, Lily asked Maria, "Did you ever lose someone?" The question hung in the air, heavy but honest. Maria paused, her brush still. "Yes," she said softly. "My husband. He went away, and I don't know where. But I had my kids, and we found ways to keep going. Like painting. It helps the heart speak." Ethan looked up, his pencil stopping. "Does it ever stop hurting?" Maria met his eyes. "It changes. It gets softer, like a wave that doesn't crash so hard anymore." Ethan nodded, returning to his sketch, and Lily reached for another color. The kitchen smelled of paint and possibility, a small rebellion against the grief that had held them so long. James noticed the change, though he didn't fully understand it. He started coming home earlier, drawn by the sound of Lily's giggles, or the sight of Ethan's sketches on the fridge. One night he found a note in the memory jar in Ethan's jagged handwriting, "Mom would like Maria." He stood there, the jar in his hands, his eyes stinging. He thought of Abigail, her love for the sea, her belief that joy could be found in small things, a shell, a song, a shared moment. Maria was bringing that back, not with money or expertise, but with something deeper. James didn't know her story, didn't know she'd once led children through their own pain in a faraway country. But he saw the paintings, the jar, the way his kids looked at her. And for the first time in months, he felt a crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. He wasn't ready to name, it wasn't ready to feel it fully, but he knew one thing: Maria Gonzalez was more than a housekeeper. She was a spark, and this house so long in darkness was starting to glow. The San Francisco autumn was settling in the air, crisp with the scent of eucalyptus and damp earth. As Maria Gonzalez arrived at the Harper mansion, her canvas bag heavier today with a small packet of lavender seeds. It was early November 2025, and the Pacific Heights estate, with its sleek glass walls and infinity pool, no longer felt like a cold monument to grief. The kitchen smelled faintly of paint from last week's art session, and the memory jar on the counter was nearly full, its colorful notes a quiet testament to the healing that had begun. Maria, at 42, moved through the house with purpose, her worn sneakers silent on the hardwood floors. She'd been cleaning the Harper home for 2 months now, but her role had shifted, unspoken, but undeniable. Ethan, 12, and Lily, 7, sought her out, not just for her stories or paintbrushes, but for the way she listened. Her brown eyes steady, never rushing their words. Maria saw their pain, their small steps toward joy, and she carried her own history of loss, a husband gone in Peru, a career left behind to meet them where they were. Today, as she dusted the living room's floor-to-ceiling windows, she glanced at the overgrown backyard, where Abigail's eucalyptus tree stood lonely. An idea took root, one she'd been turning over since Lily mentioned her mother's love for plants. Maybe they could plant something not to replace Abigail, but to honor her, to give the kids something living to nurture. Maria found Lily in the music room humming softly as she clutched her stuffed octopus. "Lily," Maria said, kneeling beside her, "your mom loved plants, didn't she? What if we made a garden for her? Something with flowers she liked." Lily's eyes widened, her small face brightening. "Mommy loved lavender. She said it smelled like calm." Maria smiled, pulling the seed packet from her bag. "Then, let's plant some lavender. You and Ethan can help." Ethan, passing by with his hoodie up, paused. "A garden, like digging in dirt." His tone was skeptical, but Maria caught the flicker of interest in his eyes. "Dirt's not so bad," she said, her voice light. "It's where things grow. Like your sketches start messy, end up beautiful." Ethan shrugged, but followed them to the backyard where the morning sun cut through the fog. Maria handed them small shovels from the shed, and they started digging near the eucalyptus tree. Lily giggled as dirt smudged her cheeks, and Ethan, despite his grumbling, carved neat rows for the seeds. Maria showed them how to press the seeds into the soil, her hands steady, teaching them to be gentle. "Plants are like hearts," she said. "Give them time and they'll bloom." Lily nodded solemnly, patting the earth like it was a promise. The garden became their project. Every afternoon the kids rushed outside to check the soil, watering it with a tiny can Lily decorated with starfish stickers. Maria shared stories of her childhood in Lima, where her mother grew herbs in a cramped courtyard, teaching her to see plants as stories of resilience. Ethan, usually quiet, asked, "Did your mom plant lavender?" Maria shook her head. "No, but she grew rosemary. Said it was for remembering. Maybe we can plant some for your mom, too." Ethan nodded his hands in the dirt, and for the first time Maria saw him smile without prompting. The backyard, once neglected, was coming alive, small patches of turned earth, a promise of green. James Harper, coming home one evening, found them there, Lily covered in mud, Ethan explaining soil pH with surprising enthusiasm. James hesitated, his tie loosened, then grabbed a shovel. "Room for one more?" he asked, his voice tentative. Lily squealed, tugging him to the garden. James dug beside them, his expensive watch flecked with dirt, and for a moment he felt like a father again, not just a man drowning in grief. Maria watched, her heart full, seeing a family stitch itself back together, one small root at a time. Maria's own children, Sophia, 16, and Diego, 14, came to the mansion one Saturday, their first visit. Maria had asked James the day before, her voice careful. "Would it be okay if my kids stopped by? They're good kids. Just curious about where I work." James nodded, no hesitation. "Of course, they're welcome." Sophia, with her quiet confidence and nursing school textbooks, brought a loaf of her mother's Peruvian cornbread, still warm. Diego, wiry and energetic, carried a soccer ball and a battered Bluetooth speaker, blasting reggaeton. The Harper kids were shy at first, but Diego broke the ice, kicking the ball to Ethan in the backyard. "You play?" he asked, grinning. Ethan, surprised, nodded, and within minutes they were sprinting across the grass, laughing as Diego faked a dramatic fall. Sophia sat with Lily on the patio, teaching her to braid lavender stems into tiny crowns. "My mom used to do this with me," Sophia said, her fingers deft. Lily beamed, slipping a crown onto her stuffed octopus. The house echoed with sounds it hadn't known in months. Running, feet shouts, music. Maria watched from the kitchen, her eyes misty. Her children, who'd grown up too fast after their father's disappearance, were finding joy here too. James, working from his home office, heard the noise and stepped outside. He saw Ethan laughing, chasing Diego and Lily wearing her lavender crown, her face alight. He caught Maria's eye, and she smiled a quiet acknowledgement of the moment. James felt something shift, a warmth he hadn't known since Abigail. He joined them, kicking the ball with Ethan and Diego, his laughter rusty but real. Later, as the kids ate cornbread at the kitchen table, James pulled Maria aside. "You've done something I couldn't," he said, his voice low. "The kids, they're alive again." Maria shook her head. "They were always alive, Mr. Harper. They just needed someone to see it." James looked at her, really saw her, her worn apron, her steady hands, the strength in her quiet presence. "Call me James," he said, and for the first time he noticed the faint lines around her eyes, proof of a life lived through hardship and love. But not everyone was happy with the change. Claire, the nanny, felt her role unraveling. She'd spent weeks planning structured activities, music lessons, emotional growth, workshops. But the kids ignored her, drawn to Maria's warmth. One afternoon, as Maria and Lily planted rosemary, Claire stormed into the backyard. "Maria, this isn't your job," she said, her voice tight. "You're the housekeeper, not their caregiver." Lily froze, clutching Maria's hand. Ethan nearby snapped, "She's better than you. She doesn't make us talk about feelings all the time." Claire's face flushed, but she didn't argue. The next day, she handed James her resignation, citing an unsuitable work environment. James read the letter unsurprised. He'd seen how the kids leaned into Maria, how they trusted her in a way they never trusted Claire's rigid schedules. He called Maria into his study that evening, the memory jar glowing softly on the shelf. "Maria," he said, "I know this isn't what you signed up for, but the kids need you not just to clean, but to be here like you've been. Would you consider staying on, helping them more?" Maria paused, her hands folded. "Are you sure I'm no expert?" James nodded. "You're what they need. And honestly, so am I." Maria's eyes softened, and she nodded a quiet agreement that felt like a vow. Maria's past stayed unspoken, but it shaped her every action. In Peru, she'd led art programs for children who'd lost parents to violence, teaching them to paint their pain into something beautiful. She'd given that up to keep Sofia and Diego safe, trading her passion for survival. But here in this mansion, she was finding it again. She taught Ethan to mix colors for his sketches, showed Lily how to press flowers between book pages. She shared stories of her mother's garden of nights spent under Lima's stars, and the kids listened, their own stories spilling out. One evening, as they watered the lavender, Lily asked Maria, "Do you miss Peru?" Maria nodded. "Every day. But I have my kids, and now I have you." "That's home." Ethan, usually silent, said, "Mom would have liked your stories." Maria smiled, her heart aching and full. The garden was growing small sprouts, pushing through the soil, and so was the family. James was changing too. He started leaving the office by 6:00 p.m., silencing his phone during dinner. The kitchen table, once a place of silence, was now alive with chatter. Lily describing her lavender crown, Ethan debating comic book heroes with Diego's enthusiasm in his memory. James listened, his eyes lingering on Maria as she served soup she'd made a recipe from her mother. He learned bits of her story not from her, but from Sofia, who mentioned their escape from Peru, their father's disappearance. James saw Maria's strength, her sacrifice, and it humbled him. He'd built a fortune, but Maria had built a life from nothing, raising her children with love despite loss. One night, as they washed dishes together, Maria rinsing, James drying, he said, "You're not just good with my kids, you're good for this house." Maria laughed softly, her hands in soapy water. "It's a good house, James. It just needed a little care." He looked at her the way her hair curled loose from its bun, and felt something he hadn't in years. A flutter not just of gratitude, but of something deeper, something he wasn't ready to name. The garden grew, and so did the bond between the families. Sofia and Diego visited again, bringing more cornbread and music. Ethan and Diego sketched comics together. Lily and Sofia made flower crowns for the whole group. The mansion's backyard, once a silent expanse, was now a place of laughter, of muddy shoes and shared stories. Maria watched, her heart swelling, seeing her children and the Harper kids become something like siblings. James watched too from the patio, his coffee growing cold. He saw Lily's smile, Ethan's ease, and Maria at the center, her quiet presence holding them all. He thought of Abigail, her love for growing things, and realized this garden was her legacy carried forward by a woman she'd never met. The thought didn't hurt, it healed. And as the sun set painting the sky gold over the bay, James knew something had taken root in him too, a hope that maybe, just maybe, this house could be a home again. By late November 2025, the Harper Mansion in San Francisco's Pacific Heights was no longer a hollow shell of glass and steel. The lavender and rosemary in the backyard garden had taken root, their delicate sprouts a quiet promise, under the eucalyptus tree that Abigail had loved. The kitchen, once sterile, now carried the scent of Maria Gonzalez's Peruvian cornbread, or the occasional batch of cookies baked with Ethan and Lily. The memory jar on the counter overflowed with notes about Abigail, her love for starfish, her silly wave impressions, her bedtime stories, each one a step toward healing. For Ethan, 12, and Lily, 7. Maria, at 42, had become the heartbeat of the house, her presence as a housekeeper evolving into something far greater. She wasn't just cleaning or planting gardens. She was weaving the Harpers back together thread by gentle thread, with her stories, her patience, and her ability to see the children's hearts. James Harper, the tech mogul who'd once buried himself in work to escape grief, now came home by 6:00 p.m. drawn to the laughter that filled the house. He saw Maria not as the help, but as a woman who'd brought light back to his family. Yet something else was stirring in him, a feeling he hadn't dared name since losing Abigail. As the city sparkled under a rare, clear sky, James began to wonder if this house, this family, could hold space for new love without betraying the old. Maria, too, felt the shift. She'd never meant to be more than a housekeeper, but the Harpers had become her home in a way she hadn't expected. Her own children, Sophia, 16, and Diego, 14, were now regular visitors, their laughter blending with Ethan and Lily's in the backyard. Sophia taught Lily to braid flowers into necklaces while Diego and Ethan traded comic book ideas, their sketches littering the kitchen table. Maria watched her heart full but cautious. She'd known loss, her husband's disappearance in Peru, the career she'd left behind as a youth worker, and she'd learned to guard her heart. Yet James's quiet gestures, like handing her a coffee with a soft, "You're doing so much," or joining her to wash dishes, made her pulse quicken. She pushed the feelings down, telling herself she was just the housekeeper, a single mother from Oakland with no place in a tech mogul's world. But the way Lily called her Tia Maria, and Ethan sought her advice on his sketches, told her she was already more. The mansion, once a mausoleum, was alive again, and Maria was at its center, her hands no longer just cleaning, but building. One chilly morning, as Maria watered the lavender, an idea struck her. James's company Solar Wave was funding a youth center in the Mission District, a project to support underserved kids with tech and art programs. Maria had overheard James discussing it, the plans for a sleek building with coding labs and study rooms. But she saw something missing, a space for kids to heal, not just learn. In Peru, she'd run art programs for children who'd lost parents using paint and stories to help them process pain. She hesitated to speak up. She was no expert, not in James's world, but the memory of Ethan's wave sketch and Lily's mermaid painting pushed her forward. That evening, as James helped her chop vegetables for a stew, she spoke carefully. "James, the youth center. Have you thought about a place for kids to just be, not to code or study, but to create, to talk about what hurts?" James paused, his knife still. Like what Maria described her vision, a room with easels, clay music, where kids could express what words couldn't hold. "I used to do this in Lima," she said, her voice steady. "It helped kids feel seen." James looked at her, his eyes searching. "You've done this before," Maria nodded, sharing a piece of her past for the first time. "I worked with kids who'd lost a lot. Art gave them a voice." James set down his knife. "Will you help me make it happen?" "Lead it." Maria blinked, stunned. "Me? I'm just—" James cut her off. "You're not just anything. You've brought my kids back to life. I trust you." Maria's heart raced, but she nodded, a quiet fire igniting in her chest. The Youth Center project became Maria's canvas. She met with James's team, sketching plans for a mural-covered room with soft lighting and instruments, a sanctuary for kids with bruised hearts. Ethan and Lily begged to help, and Maria let them, giving Ethan a wall to design a comic-style mural, and Lily a corner to paint starfish. The kids threw themselves into it, Ethan sketching waves and heroes, Lily humming as she mixed colors. Maria hired single mothers and former teachers from the Mission District, women like her who had been overlooked but understood kids. The center's opening was set for early December, and the Harpers and Maria's children worked together, painting, hammering, laughing. Sophia taught Lily to play a simple tune on a donated guitar, while Diego and Ethan debated superhero logos for the mural. James watched his laptop, forgotten, marveling at Maria's ability to turn a cold blueprint into a living space. One evening, as they hung fairy lights in the center's art room, James caught Maria's eye. "This is more than I imagined," he said. Maria smiled, brushing paint from her hands. "It's what kids need, a place to feel safe." James nodded, his gaze lingering, and Maria felt that flutter again, one she couldn't ignore. The center's opening was a celebration. Kids from the Mission District flooded in, their eyes wide at the colorful walls and easels. Ethan led a comic workshop, his voice confident, as he showed younger kids how to draw heroes. Lily, clutching her stuffed octopus, sang a sea shanty she'd learned from Abigail, her small voice ringing clear. Maria stood at the mural's edge, watching the chaos of paint and laughter, her heart swelling. James gave a short speech crediting Maria, and the crowd applauded. She blushed, unused to the spotlight, but James's smile steadied her. After, as families explored the center, James pulled Maria aside to the mural, its waves and starfish glowing under the lights. "Maria," he said, his voice low, "you've done more than rebuild a space. You've rebuilt us." He took her hand, his fingers warm, and Maria's breath caught. Before she could speak, he knelt, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a silver ring engraved with a tiny sunflower, Lily's favorite, a symbol of their garden. "I didn't think I could love again," James said, his voice trembling. "But you showed me how, not by replacing Abigail, but by honoring her, by loving my kids, by making this house a home. Maria, will you marry me?" The room seemed to still, though kids laughed nearby. Maria's eyes filled with tears, not from fear, but from joy. She nodded, her voice a whisper. "Yes." Ethan and Lily, watching from the crowd, cheered Lily, shouting Tia Maria's "staying forever." Sophia and Diego grinned, Diego whispering, "About time, Mama." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Maria and her children moved into the mansion not as guests, but as family. The house was reorganized not into separate spaces, but into one shared life. Ethan and Diego shared a room, their comic books and soccer gear scattered together. Sophia and Lily turned the music room into a crafting haven, braiding flowers and strumming guitars. James and Maria kept things simple, their love unspoken, but woven into every glance, every shared dish washed, every quiet moment, reading on the patio. The garden bloomed lavender and rosemary, filling the air, and Sunday dinners became a ritual. Abigail's clam chowder one week, Maria's Peruvian lomo saltado the next. The kids made menus, Ethan rating each dish with stars, Lily drawing starfish on napkins. James, once a stranger in his own home, now led the table, his laughter mingling with the kids. One evening, as they ate under the fairy lights Maria had hung, Lily said, "This feels like Mommy's here, but with us, too." Maria squeezed her hand, and James nodded, his eyes on the memory jar, now joined by a new one for their shared moments. The youth center thrived under Maria's leadership, a beacon for kids who needed more than lessons, they needed love. Maria trained her team to listen, to let kids paint their pain, sing their hopes. James funded expansions, but Maria gave it soul. The Harpers and Gonzalez kids volunteered, Ethan teaching art, Lily leading sing-alongs, Sophia and Diego mentoring teens. The community noticed. Local papers called it the Sanctuary, a place where hearts healed. James, watching Maria guide a shy boy through his first painting, realized She hadn't just saved his family. She was saving others too. One night, as they walked home from the center, the city glowing gold, James stopped under a streetlight. "Maria," he said, "I used to think love was something you find once. You showed me it's something you build every day." Maria smiled, her hand in his. "It's like a garden, James. You plant it, you tend it, it grows." They stood there. The world hushed. Their hands linked, their hearts already one. The lesson was clear, not just for the Harpers, but for anyone listening. Happiness isn't bought with money or status. It's grown through presence, through listening, through small acts of love. James had tried to fill the void with toys, trips, experts, but his kids didn't need solutions. They needed someone to stay, to see their pain, to share their joy. Maria, with her paintbrushes and lavender seeds, didn't fix their grief. She held it, gave it space to soften. The youth center, the garden, the memory jars were more than projects. They were proof that healing comes from connection, from community, from love, that asks for nothing but gives everything. For children, it's not the big house or the fancy toys that make them smile. It's the hug when they're sad, the story that makes them laugh, the hand of child that holds theirs through the dark. And for adults, it's a reminder, miracles don't come from wealth or expertise, but from the quiet presence of someone who cares enough to stay. Maria didn't just rebuild a family. She showed that love in its simplest form is what makes a home, a community, a life.